Good evening, everybody.
Hey, she's talking! Everybody else stop talking!
I'd first like to tell you about next month's speaker. We have Dr. Micah Kubik from the ACLU.
Yay!
So I'm really excited about that. So come back next month. But tonight, I'm really excited about tonight's speaker as well. He has co-created and lives in the rainbow-colored equality house. Baptist Church. His work has been featured on commentaries. Work and commentary has been covered in the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, National Geographic, and most other major outlets. He is currently the president of Loud Light, an organization he founded to advance millennial civic participation and mobilize underrepresented communities in Kansas. Please welcome Davis Hammet.
Woo!
Thank you. All right, thank you for having me. First off, I want to say one of the reasons that I love coming out to Johnson County, what you might not know, or you might know, is that Johnson County is the most rapidly growing part of the state. After the next 2020 census, y'all are likely to gain 2 to 3 more state representatives. So from this, I'm going to step back for a second and tell you a little bit about who I am and why I do what I do. So I'm from Florida. I'm actually from North Florida, so think Lower Alabama. This Kansas to me is a progressive state from where I'm from. I grew up in a place where we knew the 2 Democrat families in our town. And very early on, I became an activist. Actually, in 4th grade, I was arrested trying to shut down a Burger King for animal rights. I tried to do things with land use and all kinds of other protests. In the university at Florida State University, I worked for Repower America, an organization. I was trying to advance the idea of creating a renewable energy economy. And so I've done all kinds of different activism on different levels. I've worked on political campaigns since I was in elementary school, on state representative campaigns and such. And then after university, I was asked to come work with Planning Peace, an international elite group. So I moved to Brooklyn, New York, and I was working on getting international aid programs going, so getting medicine to different countries, running orphanages in India and in Haiti. And at that point, the president of the organization, Aaron Jackson, asked me if I'd be willing to go to Kansas to paint a house rainbow. To be completely honest, I did not know where Kansas was on a map. And I knew it was somewhere in the middle. I had all the tropes that I've also come to hate, right? The Wizard of Oz jokes that still my mother, whenever I call 5 years later, still cracks those jokes to me. And then I had all these kind of stereotypes about what Kansas would be. And I say this as a Southerner, right? As I said, coming from essentially Lower Alabama. And when I got to Kansas, one of the most shocking things, and this is before we had painted the house or anything, I lived here for 3 months before we painted the house, and there was this huge disconnect, because Westboro Baptist Church was my perception of Kansas. And no one here seemed at all like Westboro Baptist Church. And I even say this is, I kind of grew up with Southern comfort and that Southern hospitality. And what I realized here was it was like Southern hospitality without the kind of underhanded, oh, well, bless your soul part. There was this really sincere, people-centered attitude where I felt like anywhere I was, I could easily start a conversation with someone, and I was making friends way faster than I was making in New York, and I really just kind of liked, not to kind of say this, but the salt of the earth attitude, right? This very kind of community-centric attitude that I hadn't experienced anywhere else. So we painted the house. We had no clue what would happen. And to our surprise, we thought it would make, it would get a little bit of an attention, and it became this kind of international success. We were doing talk shows in Australia and in Ireland and in Sweden and all across the country. And with the house, it was this moment where instead of Westboro Baptist Church, it was Topeka in Kansas was now the community not of the Westboro Baptist Church, but the community that stood up to the Westboro Baptist Church. And watching people, you know, I mean, as I said, me and Aaron, we were originally from Florida to New York, and we came in here and we did that. Watching the community really own that. And we realized it wasn't our own thing, it was the community's activism, and the community rallied behind us, from local business owners to different nonprofits to even some politicians really rallied behind that, and it was an encouraging thing. So I started working on various parts of activism in the state. I started working on bully prevention. I'm bisexual, by the way, and whenever I was working with Western Kansas on creating a bully prevention curriculum, it pissed off a lot of politicians. But my whole narrative was, I was like, I'm here to help as much as, you know, as a short kid, as a queer kid, as a member of the Phelps family. I don't think any kid in a learning environment should be harassed. They should be in an ideal environment to absorb that knowledge.
Yeah.
So with this too, I started, as I said, I've been an activist my whole life. So I went to the Capitol. It was about a month after we painted the house. It was International Women's Day, and there was going to be a rally. And I was like, oh, International Women's Day, how could this be controversial? There's going to be tons of people. I'm so excited. And there were 5 people. And I started showing up to other events, and this is again in the beginning, middle of 2013, and there were so few people showing up, doing these rallies, doing activism. And I was kind of like, maybe this is part of this disconnect of, realizing more and more the politics of the state don't seem like the people of the state that I'm meeting everywhere. And whenever I decided to look into the data, and it was right after the 2014 election, I was like, this seems a little bit odd, some of these outcomes. And what I found is that Kansas has one of the bottom 5 youth participations in the nation. And among various communities, the participation is so low in the electoral process. And I started realizing that it really wasn't the people of Kansas that were reflected in the politics, it was that most of the people struggling in Kansas were being completely excluded from the process of politics. And so with this, I decided to create a different organization called Loud Light. And I'm 27 now, by the way, and I was like 24, 25 when I started brainstorming this. And I was like, wow, how do you get young people engaged in politics? And besides the normal things of, voter apathy and the things that kind of turn anyone off from politics, right? Not feeling like you know enough, not feeling like your vote matters, I started researching the SAFE Act, right? This is Chris Kobach's kind of legislative achievement. And there are 2 huge parts to that. One of them is voter ID, which we know disproportionately impacts the disabled community, various racial minority communities. But then there was proof of citizenship. In proof of citizenship, the requirement that you now have to submit that with your voter registration only applies to people who register to vote after January 1st of 2013. So who is that? That's young people. And exactly what we see is that right at that point, all of a sudden young people, it becomes almost impossible for them to register to vote. And then a couple of years later, they started deleting voter registrations that hadn't submitted their passport or birth certificate within 90 days. In the 2016 election, what that looked like is over 12,000 mostly young folks who have been completely deleted out of the system who had tried to register to vote. And these are Kansas citizens, by the way. They've been deleted out of the system. The ACLU has won a series of lawsuits on parts of this. So they won it with a DMV. If they hadn't won the DMV voter registration, where now if you register at the DMV, you don't have to submit proof of citizenship. If they hadn't won that, that would have been another 20,000 people that wouldn't have been able to vote. They also, now we can use the federal form to register to vote. Always use the federal form. Always use the federal form. But even with that, that's kind of on a thread, right? That's about one judge held up that case, and that could change. So the SAFE Act has really disenfranchised, specifically communities of color, young people, the disabled community, older folks who were born in rural communities and they never got a birth certificate. So this is really disenfranchising people from participating, but with young people I view it as a bigger problem of it's detaching young people from their communities. So in Kansas, we're experiencing a brain drain. Across the board, young people right out of high school or right out of college are leaving the state and taking their technical skills. And it's a huge problem for the economy of the state. And I mean, not to mention a huge problem for families of the state, right? This is kids and grandkids leaving the state. And I personally feel like, and in my own experience, seeing that because young folks aren't at all invested in their communities because they're being disenfranchised. There's not a way for them to, I mean, if you can't even get them to vote in an election because you have laws excluding them, there's not organizations giving them leadership positions to bring them in to value them. So we have this huge disconnect between an entire upcoming generation and the politics and the future of the state. And I think that's a huge problem, so that's what I work on. And one of the big pillars that I work on is direct voter engagement. Right, so I work with Cassie and all kinds of other people working on universities to just get young people registered to vote. It's a federal form. But also I go into college classrooms and I talk about the power of one person. And I think a lot of people don't, whenever we think about voting, we always talk about presidential politics. And I think that is the biggest mistake we can make. The first thing I usually do on a college campus when a young person tells me my vote doesn't matter, and especially before the 2016 election, is I tell them, you're right, your vote doesn't matter for president. We're in Kansas, your vote isn't going to mean anything in this election to them. It's like, but your state representative was won by 130 votes. They decide your tuition. The person deciding how much debt you're going to be in for the rest of your life was won by a margin of votes that could just be you and your friend knocking doors for them. On the power of one, so I live in Topeka, Kansas. And as I said, I'm queer and I live in a rainbow house. My city council member that was running, there were two candidates. One of them was pro-LGBT, one of them was adamantly anti-LGBT. Actually, the city council hearing had called me a disease on this world and was running to be my representative in government. So myself and a couple friends, we knocked doors for the pro-LGBT candidate. He won by 48 votes. By one weekend of getting involved, of making the politics personal to my friends and getting out there and doing something, that's the margin that decided that someone that hates me doesn't represent me in government.
Yeah!
So with this, I understand that like talking about big numbers of people being disenfranchised might not make sense and can get a little jargony. So essentially what happened when the SAFE Act took place is it froze the electorate. So Kansas actually doesn't have the electorate, the people voting that it should have. What it has is they froze the electorate in 2012. So essentially it hasn't changed. The people who are able to vote in 2012, which, I mean, we know the results of those kind of elections, right? It was frozen at that point. It's literally politicians picking their voters. They were like, ooh, this is a good period, let's freeze it. Let's make it impossible for people to enter. And a lot of that was they said that all these undocumented individuals were voting, right? Again, it only applied to new registrants, so if there were undocumented people voting, Chris Kobach essentially gave them amnesty in the election process. And I mean, if you really look into the research, which by the way on lawlight.org, I have some of this stuff, you'll see that all the research concludes that the amount of undocumented individuals voting is 0%. This is a tiny, 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 nearly non-existent problem. With that too, with it frozen and excluding millennials, this is kind of an important thing because when you exclude particularly young people, as I'm sure many of you know, young people are more, ideal and dreamy about their outlooks on things. And we look on the things of renewable energy. Over 90% of people under 30 years old want a rapid transition to complete renewable energy. They want police reform, they want sentencing reform, they want universal pre-K, they want maternity and paternity leave. All these basic justice issues are overwhelmingly supported by the millennial population. So when you exclude them, a lot of these ideas are excluded from political dialogue. I spend a lot of time in the Capitol during session. I know state representatives who think that the student debt crisis going on, they think that's the most important issue to our economy in the future, and they don't talk about it once. They won't talk about it publicly at all. And I was like, why don't you talk about this? And they're saying, well, the people who care about it don't vote, so I can't talk about it. And this is what skews us. So I also tell young people, I'm like, look, even if you don't like any politician, even if you leave your ballot blank, just cast your ballot. Because if they start to see more and more young people voting, they're going to start dealing with younger issues. Even on college campuses, very few politicians spend any time on college campuses now. And this is because young people don't vote. Johnson County Community College, if you aren't familiar, it's actually the third largest student population in the state. It competes with KU and K-State for how many students there are there. It's 20 to 30,000 enrollment at Johnson County Community College. It oversees several state rep districts that are won by less than 1,000 votes. Also in state rep districts, nearly half of the districts in Kansas for state representative in 2016 were uncontested. They literally didn't even have an opponent, which is a completely another problem whenever people become so disenfranchised and so jaded that there's not even any competition. Why would you show up to vote? All of this is leading to more apathy, disengaging more and more people, and making it easier and easier to not just give up on the political process, but to give up on your community, to give up on, frankly, your family in these regards, and be more willing to leave the state, which destroys the opportunity for Kansas's future. So we have to change the laws, we have to change perspectives, and we have to build. Me personally, again, I'm a young person, I'm 27, so I think that a lot of this key is building youth democratic power. But we also have to bridge the divides. And as I said, I'm from the South, and finding new ways, I would imagine a lot of folks here, this is a Democrat event, so I would imagine a lot of you are progressive. Finding new ways and new language to talk to people you disagree with. I live across from one of the most well-known, most hated hate groups in the country. They bring me tomatoes when they're in season. We text each other. And I want to be clear that I'm not forgiving. What they do is awful and harmful and drives people to kill themselves. It's really bad. But bridging those divides, realizing, not giving up on anyone, recognize the inherent dignity of everyone. And, for me, a big moment of living across from the Westboro Baptist Church is seeing them as a family, laughing and playing in the park and having this cognitive dissonance of I'm supposed to hate you, I'm supposed to think you're awful, and then being like, wow, you just seem like people who were misguided, who were miseducated. And now I know members who have left, more and more members who have left. And each member of the Westboro Baptist Church who has left the Westboro Baptist Church has a story of someone who relentlessly loved them and wanted to understand them even though they knew who they were. One of those is Megan Phelps Roper, who on Twitter, so they're also anti-Semitic, if you don't know this about Westboro Baptist Church. There was a guy in a band, Jewalicious, which is a Jewish funk band, and Megan was tweeting anti-Semitic things at him, right? Like things like, oh, Hitler had one thing right. Just awful things. But he started just in the private messages being like, oh, Megan, you look great at the protest today, and all these little icebreakers. And eventually she was having a bad day and she started a conversation. And eventually at a protest they exchanged gifts on the side. Fast forward a couple of years, he flew out here to help her leave the church, and she went and helped at-risk Jewish teens. Wow. And it was all because someone was willing to say, you aren't your ideology, you're a person, and these awful things that you do are just because you haven't had exposure to these better ways. But also with that, it can't be as simple as saying I'm right and you're wrong. If you're trying to have a conversation with people you disagree with, if you aren't willing to have your mind changed, you aren't going to change anyone's mind. Getting into those really difficult, really sensitive conversations that might be so personal to you and being willing to hear someone out and then let them hear you out, you're going to make a stronger friendship, you're going to make a stronger bond, you're going to learn a lot more. I'm able to talk about economics in Kansas in a completely different way because I was raised in a very conservative area. My college education in economics, I later found out was funded by Koch Industries. So that whole libertarian economics, I was taught that. I had to unteach myself it, but I can speak that language. And I don't think the people who believe that, even with the tax experiment, that put the state $20 billion in debt and has destroyed a lot of things, I understood why they were doing it, and I was willing to hear them out, but I wanted to also talk to them in their own language about why it was wrong. We, and especially in a state like Kansas, You're not going to win these ideas unless you bridge those divides and have those intimate, difficult conversations. I mean, one of the things you can do, right now or tomorrow is that person you disagree with and you disconnected with, try to reach out to them, ask to have coffee, and as much as it hurts, as much as you squirm for it, sit there and have the conversation and bridge the divide. Because if we're willing to deny the human dignity of someone else, we're no better than anyone. When Fred Phelps died, people put me on, this is when I was in the New York Times and other things, people immediately interviewed me about a man's death. And they thought I was going to say celebrate and everything. And I was like, this is a father, this is a grandfather. I extremely disagree with him, but I am never going to celebrate death. I'm never going to celebrate the murder of someone, or not, sorry, it wasn't murder. But I'm never going to celebrate the death of someone, or the murder of someone for that. Because then what are my values? What are our values? And ask yourself, what are your values and how do you really live that out and bring people into that? Because if you're sincere about your values, even if someone disagrees, they'll start to understand where you come from. So with changing politics and with changing your politician's mind, the most important phrase I can kind of tell you if you're trying to contact your legislator about any issue, from city council to the president, is that proximity is power. Proximity is power. The closer you can get to a politician, if that means coming to the state house and interjecting and jumping into them while they run between committees because they're going to ignore your calls, do it. The more personal you can get. I was actually laughing before this. My mom called me and she was like, I've been watching Jimmy Kimmel and I need to call my senator. What's the best way to do this? And she was like, can I just send an email? And I was like, you can do that, but really you need to send an email, you need to write a personal letter, and you need to be calling. The most that you drain their resources, the more likely they're going to have to deal with you. And if you can get in front of them personally, it's going to change them in a way that you couldn't otherwise do. On this too is making politics personal. Realizing that your life, your struggle, what your family's struggling with, that is politics. As I said, I'm queer, that's political. Every part of my identity is political. Every part of our lives is political. I don't know how it is over here, but I live in Topeka, where nearly 80% of kids in public schools are on free and reduced lunch. We have rapid poverty. That's political. Making these issues political and really talking about them in the context. Public policy can make people live out their full potential, or it can literally kill people. Bad public policy kills people every day. Realize that. Make it political. And in this too, so Representative Cindy Holscher, in a committee that I was in, and they were talking about making certain medical access to help kids, and it was very bureaucratic, the whole conversation. And at one point, Cindy talked about her own family and the struggle that they've gone through. And I kind of want to cry when I talk about it because it just changed the room. They realized, all these people who completely disagreed with the perspective that Sydney and some of the Democrats were coming from, they just stopped. Because it wasn't a public policy anymore, it was Sydney's family. And when you do that, you transform politics, and they again become a community process. So with that too, always recognize that these, if it's the president, if it's the governor, if it's your state rep, if it's your city council, if it's someone on the water district, these are just people. Some of them are brilliant, a whole lot of them aren't. And never think that they don't have time for you, right? They're elected by you, you can get in their face and have these conversations. You should never give up on putting your struggles in the forefront. Also, I think part of our problem is that in this proximity, a lot of us, and I will say, I know I'm in Johnson County. There are a lot of struggles that folks in Johnson County or certain parts of Johnson County might not regularly interact with. And someone asked me, they were like, how do you end homelessness? If every time a U.S. senator came home, if they had a homeless person on their doorstep, homelessness would end tomorrow in America. Amen. I come from a place in Florida where it's a resort town, and they literally pick up homeless folks, drive them 30 minutes out of the town, and kick them out. Because they know if you see the problems, if the problem's on your doorstep, then you have to deal with it. So if it's another issue, if it means you going out of your way, maybe you don't deal with poverty every day, going to a part of your community that has going to a soup kitchen and working there, going to a homeless shelter and getting attached to these real issues, make it so that you understand the real problems and how bad it is in Kansas. In Pretty Prairie, Kansas, which they just got, they just funded a water project that they'll never be able to pay off. Their water is so polluted with nitrogen that pregnant women and young children had to get federal water vouchers because the water would deform babies if women who were pregnant would drink it. That's not just Pretty Prairie. If you think about Flint, Michigan, that is happening all over Kansas. These are real, uncomfortable discussions. But they change it because this isn't Democrat versus Republican or progressive or whatever. This is deformed birth. This is people going hungry. This is human suffering. And across the board, when you get down to that, I think overwhelmingly people want to reduce human suffering. So on a positive note now, I'll tell you this is the reason that I decided to stay in Kansas and the reason I love Kansas. As I said, I'm from Florida, and for the first couple of years, every time I go home, everyone will be like, what are you doing? When are you coming back to a coastal place? Why do you love it so much? I love the history of Kansas. I love the fact that once this led the nation on all kinds of issues. You might know Brown v. Board and those things, which, by the way, even after Brown v. Board, our communities are still incredibly segregated. Our schools are still incredibly segregated. But there's other things of our history. In 1892, Kansas had a populist governor and a populist legislature. There were miners' strikes here. They literally overthrew governments. I mean, there's an incredible rich history where we stand on the shoulders of giants. But there's also beautiful, beautiful opportunity here that's happening now. The Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, is creating perennial polyculture. They're trying to make grains, like staple grains, what would be like wheat, but that never have to be replanted. And they grow roots that are 20 feet deep. They could restore the soil, restore the food system, create a food system that doesn't nearly damage the environment like our current system does. That could end world hunger. The research that's going on in Salina, Kansas. People come from all around the world to study there. Kansas now has 1/3 of our energy comes from wind. 1/3 of your energy comes from renewable sources. That's incredible. That's exciting. That's inspiring. We're doing these really revolutionary things here, and I think that it can bring a lot of people into the process when you talk about it, because everyone's so down on the state and I don't think that they realize how much is happening here now. With that, I ask that you be hopeful, that you bring people into this movement, that you keep on recruiting whatever your group is, talking to people, making them belong to a political movement. That you spend every day not getting caught up. I know in the national stuff it can really get you down. And if you ever get to that point, remember that every day you can change something in your personal life, in your neighborhood, in your city, that can start the revolution. Politics is personal, politics is local. You have the capacity to change your city, to register your neighbors, to change policy. In Lawrence right now, they're working on affordable housing policies. I'm sure in your town, if you dig deep enough, there's incredible policies that would inspire you and you can get involved with. So really think locally. Think of what you can do from your own personal self to improve your health, improve your being, on up. And then you'll be encouraged, you'll be energized to really transform Kansas. So with that, thank you. And I'll kind of open this up to any questions. Yes.
You said something that was very confusing. You had to keep your mind open to change. I mean, that is absolutely, if you're talking to the Westboro people, they're never going to convince you that they're right. I mean, so how is your mind open to change?
So let me put it this way. You might be surprised at how much you agree with Westboro Baptist Church. After the election, they said, no greatness for you, Mr. Trump. They have sometimes very comedic signs, but they have certain outlooks that also might surprise you on issues. I mean, they do awful things, right? But sometimes when you look at their values, they're really not as disconjoined as they might be. For example, let me talk about, one of the most controversial issues, abortion. Polarizes Kansas and most red states like nothing else. One way that you can bridge that gap of if you're pro-life or pro-choice is everyone generally agrees with real ways of reducing abortions, reducing the need for abortions. And, I was actually flying back from visiting family this summer. I sat next to a very conservative Republican couple on the plane, and we started chatting, and we had this great conversation, and it was on creating a program to provide IUDs and other birth control to low-income women to reduce abortions. And I was like, would you support that? And they got really into it. That's a way to take their values and your values, find a commonality that really, at the end of the day, we all would like to reduce abortions. And if we can both empower women and reduce abortions at the same way, that's a bipartisan approach that reaches across divides. So finding practical solutions like that both sides can agree with.
How do you propose, we're mostly a little older, and I'm in groups that are older. How do we reach out and get younger people to join with us to do things? Or should we?
So there's a couple parts to this, right? I think, in pardon that I'm going to cuss a little bit, don't bullshit people, right? And I mean, that's why immediately I tell people that your vote's not going to matter for president. And I realize that might have made some people cringe, but immediately it changes the outlook when I'm talking to someone who's young, because they realize that I'm not trying to sell them on a lofty ideal or lie to them. I'm telling them frankly where it is. I'm like, look, you don't have power there, but you have power here, and this is where you should focus your energy. So those things of engaging them on, on where their power really is. Also on information. So during the legislative session, I made these 3-minute recap videos every week, which I plan on doing again. And to my surprise, I was actually engaging a lot of young folks. And it was because it was put in the time frame that they deal with. I mean, we live in a super fast-paced world. And expecting someone to read a newspaper article that's going to take 15 minutes to read on one issue is a little far-fetched. I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, however you want to view it. So also finding quick ways to talk to folks in their language. I made a 9-minute video on the budget, and to my surprise, over 200,000 people watched it. And I was laughing because my parents are very different, and my dad loved all the data, heavy-driven stuff. And my mom was like, "Oh, it's so great when you had the emojis," so I understood what was going on. And again, it was finding those different ways of communicating, right? So there could be the data-driven person who really wants that, and then there's a person who wants just kind of these things to help of what's good and what's bad, and these more simple ideas. So finding new ways to communicate. With this also, and particularly if you have young folks in your own life, my parents, whenever I was since elementary school, would check me out on election day and take me to the polls with them. And I realized that there's an economic class thing to that. But because they did that, my parents would do that, and then they would take me out to lunch after and talk about why we vote and why it's important to be involved. Those things, and this is a little bit different than your question, but getting back to civic education.
Amen.
It's a shame that civics isn't a class in Kansas anymore. American government is not civics. It's a completely different thing, learning the structure of government versus learning what it means to be a citizen. Actually, I found a 1940s textbook of civics that someone sent to me. It's a Kansas textbook. And I read it and I was like, wow, this reads like a community organizer guide, right? It's incredible what it was saying about being a good citizen. But those things of engaging them on where their power really is and language that they understand, and then really kind of directly encouraging it along. Even if you feel like you're nagging them, getting them out to vote. My friends can't stand it, right? I send them so many texts about things, checking in on them. If I'm out with friends at a bar, they'll be like, "Davis, please don't. Please don't." Because they'll start going up to strangers and talking about registration and political power. But really doing that, right? Being the squeaky wheel in someone's life that really pushes them into the process. I hope that was helpful.
It was. Good.
Do you have any ideas on how we deal with the co-op situation?
Yes. Go
I'm not
next
noticing, so if you
Sunday.
could change how you frame your questions. I mean, so it matters what you mean by deal with. There are,
Who do we hire, Dennis?
so I don't believe in obliterating people. So there are certain things, right? And this is about setting standards in political discourse. And one thing, again, as we said, I'm nonpartisan on this. I don't care about political parties, but there is general levels of standards that I think are nonpartisan that should be lived up to. Such as, using xenophobia and racism is unacceptable for any politician.
Yes.
And the fact that one of, I think his first campaign speech was blaming the school funding crisis on immigrant children. That's not only inaccurate, it creates violence towards certain communities. And with this too, in the 2016 election, with all the ginned up fear of the other, so the Equality House, in that Rainbow House, to our surprise, we had never been vandalized, we had never been attacked. During the course of the 2016 election, the house was vandalized twice and it was shot. That had never happened before, and it's about how dangerous the rhetoric is in really establishing that is a nonpartisan issue, drawing the lines. There was, at one point, it was at the Dole Center, it was after the election, and it was really concerning because the chair of the Republican Party of Kansas had said, "We do anything to win." And this was after, they had sent out a xenophobic mailer, if y'all are familiar with that, saying, that the terrorists were moving next door. At the same time, we're in Olathe, by God, we're in Olathe where an awful murder took place based on this ginned up fear. In Garden City, we almost had one of the worst domestic terrorist attacks in our nation's history where they were about to kill 300 immigrants. But the FBI was able to prevent that. So I think on these things of no matter what the race is or whatever, people ask me that a lot. And I say, I don't care about who gets elected or what it is, but I do care about, as a state, us drawing a line in the sand of just everyone across parties saying that's unacceptable. Rhetoric that inspires violence and inspires the exclusion of certain people, especially marginalized or already people who are suffering, is unacceptable.
Yeah. Which Republican's going to say that?
I don't know. I mean, you could reach out to them and have coffee and try to persuade some of them. And I think you might be surprised again to these basics. So after that happened, after the murder,
They said it one-on-one, but they don't want to say that to their face.
I mean, after the Olathe murder happened, the House, actually the Kansas House, passed a bipartisan bill condemning the attacks. And I think it's about taking those and saying, will you live this out? Will you speak of this other things? And again, proximity, going to their events and raising your hands. That I didn't get I had my hand up for that Dole Institute thing, and I want to be like, you just said you do whatever to win. What about these mailers and the fact that they, you could directly say they inspire these hate crimes? I didn't get to ask that question, but going to these events and asking those questions. Because again, even for their constituents that grow, you might, inspire new questions in their mind.
So Nikki needs to go to the co-op event.
Well, I do intend to be in Cleveland.
Yeah, does everybody know about the event in Lawrence next Sunday?
Yeah.
October 1st.
October 1st event?
Let people know.
Yes, everybody's aware of it. Planning
Well,
on
sure,
going.
tell people about it, because I don't think I heard
Okay.
everyone saying it.
Let me come up there. It's ACLU's running it. It's their People Power Let People Vote launch, October 1st, 6:30 p.m. at the Lead Center. People Power event to launch a new national voting rights campaign called Let People Vote. It'll feature top ACLU experts who'll shed light on current issues surrounding voting rights, a panel discussion on President Trump's controversial voting commission led by Chris Kobach, and the unveiling of an action plan to mobilize Kansans and people across the nation to organize within their community to protect and expand the fundamental right to vote. Doors open at 5 for food and fun. Program starts at 6:30. Try to go. Try to get as many people there as you can.
It's
And if you
impossible.
can't go, it's also possible to have a local one.
Right.
If you can't get to Lawrence, you can set up your own. They're going to live stream and have as many of these across the country as possible. So there is this big one happening in Lawrence, but they want other ones. So if you and a group of friends want to start one at a house, that's possible too.
Yeah, so as Val said, they're going to also have live streaming open up. Yeah, this is the ACLU Nationals actually going to be launching their campaign here because Kansas is the epicenter of voter suppression. The coalition that they're forming, actually Loud Light is a part of, and I will say too, invite all of y'all to really push in the 2018 legislative session. Several groups will be pushing for voting reform, right? For repealing the SAFE Act, for trying to instate same-day voter registration, do these things, really good public policy that brings more people into the voting process. On that too, and I'll also just briefly mention, so Loud Light, the organization that I created to do all this stuff, so I still do some stuff with Playing Peace in the Quality House and Living That Rainbow, but mainly what my work is now on is Loud Light, which does this direct voter engagement, which creates these videos that some of you have seen, digestible videos from loudlight.org to see those on different public policy issues and on weekly recaps during the session. And the third part is coalition building, which is kind of culminated in, with several other groups, we created the Kansas People's Agenda, which was a 16-point platform outside of political parties, from disability rights to the right to have a living wage. And the morning after the governor's State of the State in January, we had the People's State of the State. We had nearly 1,000 people on a Wednesday in the Capitol, really made a roar there, and it's really powerful. We plan on doing that again, which will be January 10th of 2018. Again, the People's State of the State, explaining, like, you know, the governor might get up and say these lofty things, but here are real people in Kansas. There are real stories that really need to be dealt with. With that too, of building coalitions in your own life, if you're wondering what you should do, show up. You know, just show up for whatever, if it's a nonprofit, if it's an advocacy thing, if it's an event like this that you care about with a party. Showing up can be the hardest thing to do for some people, especially you introverts that somehow pulled yourself to come here. But it's the most powerful thing. And, you know, actually someone out of Johnson County, Heather Owsley, who did begin the walk, you know, the walk for public education several years ago. I met her for the final steps several years ago. I think it was her first or second time. The last couple of years, I've done the full walk, and walking for education, and this is why I was still completely focused on LGBT rights. What I started to realize is the more I was showing up for public educations, the more I was showing up for teachers, the more teachers and education advocates started showing up for LGBT issues. So building those bonds across issues, showing up for other causes that maybe aren't your personal cause, is really the first step of building a coalition in a stronger community. Yeah.
Well, I want to brag on Davis for a little bit because he doesn't toot his own horn so much, but I don't know if you watched the videos that he's put together. They are sensational. They are well thought out. Davis is in the Capitol probably as much as any legislator, maybe sometimes more, but you will find him in the library researching at the Capitol. I mean, everything he puts together, like I said, is well thought, well documented with facts and the things that people need to hear. So, and he is reaching a huge group of people out there. And if you want that messaging to continue, I would encourage you to contribute to his organization, because Davis is doing so much work just on his own, helping get information out there, and the pay in that probably is not very good.
Borderline non-existent.
Yes.
Definitely depleted all my savings the first year to make it happen.
We don't have any grants.
It's getting there. But no, I mean, this was, and by the way, on doing something yourself, this wasn't like someone didn't just come to me and be like, hey, here's all this money, do this. I mean, it was straight up a passion project where it's like, all right, I have enough savings, I'm just going to do this and see what happens and keep on trying to do the right thing and figure out what that is. And so again, I mean, yes, if you're capable of contributing, that would mean a lot. I mean, I mostly run on people who give $5 monthly donations, which makes it possible. When I did the budget video, it was very funny because some of like the Koch's economists, I could tell, were like trying to write critiques of it, where they'd be like, well, nothing was factually wrong, but this other, but I was like, wow, I'm on that radar now, and I'm sure they were looking at my funding and be like, wait, what's going on? This is running on nearly nothing. There's no like George Soros funding this. But yeah, I mean, I think that's also what makes it powerful. Is I just got out there, started trying to do stuff, and then, you know, it's worked. So also in your own community, you know, just get out there and try to do stuff. If you think it's a good idea, go for it. And if you fail, you fail. But also, you know, if you fail fast, you learn lessons, and you can build a better community faster.
Do you have a YouTube channel? I can't exactly find it.
So I post most of the stuff on Facebook, on Loudlight's Facebook. Also, if you go to loudlight.org, I have the links to the YouTube videos. You know what's funny is I mostly just promote the stuff on Facebook. So we only have, like, we're not at 100 followers on YouTube or whatever, so I can't make like a YouTube/Loudlight. So actually, if all y'all want to go on YouTube and subscribe, I can make a better URL. Sweet! But yeah, you can find all this information on loudlight.org. Also, you can find more during the legislative session if you follow it. I mean, the first video was seriously with my laptop's webcam in the corner of my bedroom, just like, hey, this is helpful, here's some information. And then it blew up, and then I tried to make it better and better, and I plan to make it even more better. And then people were like, will you tell us what's going to happen next week? And so I started being like, well, these 2 or 3 committees are happening next week. And I started posting on the website ways to contact members of that committee. And it's really grown, and I plan to make that even better. So, again, trying to make it so it's easier for you to be involved. So please follow Loudlight on Facebook, on YouTube, on everything, and we'll be putting out content so you can know what's coming up, so you can, call your state reps, be more engaged in the next legislative session.
You're at 79 now, David.
Yeah.
79 on YouTube. That's right. Only 21 to go.
And members are leaving.
Yeah, so I know there are 21 people here.
All right, well, if y'all are done, please make 2018 your best year, your most engaged year of being a Kansan ever. Thank y'all so much for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Davis. That was awesome.